Jasmine Pace was reported missing. Her body was found days later, handcuffed in a suitcase off Suck Creek Road.
2 days before Thanksgiving, 2022, a 22-year-old college student in Chattanooga, Tennessee, sent her mother a text message that felt, in hindsight, like a warning nobody knew how to read. Her name was Jasmine Pace. Friends and family called her Jazzy. She was a student at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, described by the people who loved her as a dependable old soul, the kind of daughter who called her mom every single day, sometimes more than once. So when that daily contact suddenly stopped, everyone who knew her sensed something was wrong before anyone could prove it. This is the story of what happened to Jasmine Pace, and the trial that followed. Jasmine grew up close to her family, and by all accounts, that closeness never faded as she became an adult. She was attending UTC, working toward her future, and staying tightly connected to her mother, Katrina, and her father, Travis. Family members later described her on the stand and in interviews as someone who checked in constantly, not out of obligation, but because that was simply who she was. A friend, Bailey Putman, would later tell a local news station that there wasn't a day, let alone an hour, that went by without hearing from Jasmine. That detail matters because it's precisely what made her sudden silence so alarming. Not long before the events of November 2022, Jasmine's family had lost a beloved matriarch. It was a hard season for everyone. So when Jasmine's behavior shifted afterward, becoming a little more withdrawn, a little more private about where she was spending her time, the people close to her chalked it up to grief. She needed space, they thought. She needed time. What they didn't know was that Jasmine had started seeing someone. His name was Jason Chen. He was also 22, also a student at UTC. The two had met the way so many young couples meet today through a dating app. The relationship. Jason Chen and Jasmine Pace's relationship unfolded largely out of view of her family. They were both busy college students living their own lives in Chattanooga's North Shore area, and like a lot of young relationships, it moved forward in text messages, phone calls, and time spent at each other's apartments rather than family dinners or introductions to parents. By the time investigators pieced together the final days of Jasmine's life, they found a relationship that looked ordinary from the outside. But neighbors who lived near Chen's apartment complex, the Lofts at Tremont, would later describe a different picture of him. One former neighbor, Ryan Barrett, told a local news outlet that Chen, who he considered a friend at first, seemed to change over time, becoming, in his words, mean, malicious, and manipulative, seemingly out of nowhere. Nobody connected those observations to anything dangerous. Not yet. The night before Thanksgiving. The Timeline investigators later built centers on Tuesday, November 22, 2022, 2 days before Thanksgiving. Phone records showed that Jasmine spoke with Jason Chen on the phone for over an hour that day, 1 hour and 11 minutes to be exact. After that call ended, cell phone and surveillance data indicate Jasmine made her way to Chen's apartment on Tremont Street, just off Fraser Avenue in Chattanooga's North Shore neighborhood. Later that evening, Jasmine texted her mother, Katrina, letting her know she'd be staying with a friend for the rest of the week, meaning she wouldn't be coming home for Thanksgiving. Katrina found this strange immediately. It was the Tuesday before one of the biggest family holidays of the year, and Jasmine wasn't the kind of daughter who skipped Thanksgiving with her family, let alone without much explanation. But there was nothing overtly alarming in the message itself, just an unsettling feeling, the kind a mother can't always explain but can never quite ignore either. That text message was the last real communication anyone in Jasmine's family would have from her. The days of silence. Thanksgiving came and went. Jasmine didn't show up. She didn't call. For a family used to hearing from her constantly, the silence became impossible to explain away as simply needing space. By November 26th, 4 days after that final phone call with Chen, Jasmine's family reported her missing to the Chattanooga Police Department. What followed was a rapid and unsettling shift from a missing persons case to a homicide investigation. Detectives began looking into Jasmine's last known movements, and the trail led them directly to Jason Chen's apartment. What they found inside would change the entire nature of the case. According to the Chattanooga Police Department, investigators discovered bloodstains inside the apartment. They also found Jasmine's driver's license. And perhaps most tellingly, they found newly purchased cleaning supplies. The kind of purchase that, on its own, might mean nothing, but combined with blood evidence and a missing woman's identification, painted an increasingly dark picture. Chen, investigators would later reveal, had been caught on surveillance footage at 2 separate Chattanooga stores, buying cleaning products in the days after Jasmine disappeared. He was arrested at his parents' home in Nolensville, Tennessee, in late November 2022, and charged with criminal homicide in connection with Jasmine's disappearance. At that point, her body still hadn't been found. The waiting ended on December 1st, 2022. Jasmine's stepfather was the one who first confirmed to local media that her body had been located. A few hours later, the Chattanooga Police Department made it official. Human remains recovered from inside a suitcase, dumped along the side of Suck Creek Road just outside the city near the Tennessee River, were confirmed to be Jasmine Pace. The details that emerged from the investigation and later the trial were difficult for anyone to hear, especially her family, some of whom sat in the courtroom throughout the proceedings that would follow. Prosecutors alleged that Jasmine had been stabbed 60 times. According to testimony presented at trial, her arms were handcuffed to her legs before her body was placed inside the suitcase. Hamilton County Medical Examiner Dr. Stephen Cogswell later testified that the 60 wounds were concentrated in one area of her body. Testimony so graphic that the presiding judge warned the courtroom in advance, telling anyone who might not be able to control their reaction to leave before testimony began. Forensic evidence also showed blood found beneath the carpet of Chen's apartment, in a pattern investigators said was consistent with a body having been placed underneath the bed at some point after the killing. The community reeled. Jessica Coco, a former resident of the same apartment complex, later told a local news station that discovering something like that could happen so close to home left her feeling unsafe enough to move out entirely. "It was frightening," she said, "knowing that something like that could happen, especially so close to home." As the investigation deepened, more troubling details surfaced. Police reportedly found sticky notes inside Chen's home containing information about Jasmine's past, including claims presented at trial that she had a history of running away, had experienced homelessness at one point, and had once fled to Canada. The implication prosecutors pushed back against was that this information was being gathered, perhaps, to construct a narrative, one that could later be used to explain away her disappearance, or to shift blame onto her character rather than onto the man accused of ending her life. Jason Chen was formally charged with first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. For more than 2 years, the case moved through the legal system, with Chattanooga and the surrounding community following closely. It became known locally, grimly, as the Suitcase by the River murder case. The trial. When the trial finally began in Hamilton County Criminal Court, presided over by Judge Boyd Patterson, it drew a jury of 6 women and 9 men. Notably, this jury wasn't seated in Chattanooga itself. Where the case had dominated local headlines for years, jurors were selected from near Nashville, people who, weeks earlier, had likely never heard of Jasmine Pace or the man accused of killing her. By the time the trial concluded, they would know the case intimately. One striking element of the trial: Chen had already admitted to killing Jasmine. That was not in dispute. What his defense team, led by attorney Weiss, argued instead was the nature of the killing itself. They characterized it not as a calculated, premeditated act, but as what they called a crime of passion. The result, they claimed, of Jasmine discovering messages on Chen's Tinder account and attacking him first, with the fatal stabbing occurring in a moment of self-defense. It was a defense strategy that asked the jury to reframe 60 stab wounds, handcuffs, a body stuffed in a suitcase, and a disposal site along a rural road as the product of a sudden, uncontrolled reaction rather than intent. Prosecutors worked to dismantle that narrative. They pointed to the cleaning supplies purchased at multiple stores in the days following the killing. They pointed to the sticky notes containing background information about Jasmine, evidence they argued suggested premeditation and an effort to construct a cover story. And critically, they called a forensic expert who testified that Chen had not, in fact, been active on Tinder around the time of the murder, directly undercutting the central justification behind the defense's self-defense argument. Over the course of the trial, jurors heard from the medical examiner, from Jasmine's mother Katrina, from investigators, and from forensic specialists who walked through the digital and physical evidence piece by piece. In the end, the jury did not need long to reach a decision. After the evidence had been presented and closing arguments made, jurors deliberated for less than an hour. They found Jason Chen guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, along with abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Jasmine's family, the verdict brought a measure of accountability, but not necessarily peace. Her father, Travis Pace, spoke publicly afterwards, saying that he didn't feel justice had fully been served by the outcome of the trial. A sentiment that speaks to how a life sentence, however severe, can never restore what was actually lost. The case didn't end with the verdict. In the months that followed, Chen's defense team filed a motion for a new trial, arguing that the verdict went against the weight of the evidence and that the state's case hadn't been strong enough to support a conviction. Part of their argument centered on the fact that some of Jasmine's family members, who had also served as witnesses for the prosecution, remained present in the courtroom throughout the trial. Judge Boyd Patterson denied the motion. Legal experts who weren't involved in the case noted that this outcome was typical. Motions for a new trial are filed frequently after convictions, but they are, in the words of one local attorney, very rarely granted. For now, the case is closed. Jason Chen remains in prison, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder of Jasmine "Jazzy" Pace.